Welcome back. Let's start this lesson with a brief explanation regarding the structure of the HTML document. Let's see what each HTML tag does and represents in a web page. I have already opened the Lesson-5 folder in VS Code and created a new file named documentstructure.html. You just need to pay attention to what I will explain to you. I will create a basic structure as we do every time. I type the exclamation mark and press the Tab key. Doctype HTML is the document type declaration. It tells the web browser that the document is an HTML5 document. It ensures that the browser renders the page correctly according to the HTML5 standard. The tag HTML-lang equals n is an extended version of the HTML tag with an attribute called lang. This attribute specifies the language of the document's content. HTML is the root element of an HTML document. Lang equals n attribute and value combination indicates that the primary language of the content is English. So, HTML-lang equals n informs the browser and other tools that the document is primarily in English. This can be useful for accessibility, search engines, and translation tools. For example, screen readers can better assist users who are visually impaired if they know the language of the content. Head section contains meta-information about the HTML document, such as the title, links to style sheets, scripts, and other metadata that do not directly appear on the web page. The tag meta. Charset equals UTF-8 is a meta tag used within the head section of an HTML document. Let's break down its purpose. Meta is a tag used to provide metadata about the HTML document. Metadata is information about data, and in the context of an HTML document, it provides information about the document itself. Charset equals UTF-8 attribute specifies the character encoding for the HTML document. UTF-8, Unicode Transformation Format 8-bit, is a standard encoding that can represent virtually all characters in the world, which is why it's commonly used for web pages. So, meta charset equals UTF-8 tells the browser to use UTF-8 character encoding to display the page correctly. This ensures that characters from different languages and special symbols are rendered properly. The tag meta name equals viewport is a meta tag that helps control how a web page is displayed on different devices. Let's break down its components. Name equals viewport specifies that the meta tag is for setting viewport properties. Content attribute contains the value settings for the viewport. Here's what each part of the content attribute does. Width equals device width sets the width of the viewport to the width of the device. This makes the web page adjust to fit the screen size of the device it's being viewed on, whether it's a phone, tablet, or desktop. Initial scale equals 1.0 sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded. A scale of 1.0 means no zoom, so the page is displayed at its actual size. In summary, this line helps ensure that the web page is responsive and looks good on all devices by controlling the viewport's size and scaling. The title element contains the page title, and it will be visible in the browser in the tab where the page is open. We'll discuss more about this when we get to the SEO part. Body section contains all the content of the HTML document, such as text, images, links, tables, and other elements that make up the web page's content. Now I will add a paragraph in an incorrect way, outside the HTML document. Lorem 10 and press the Tab key. I open DevTools and observe that the paragraph is between the body tags, even though I placed the paragraph outside the HTML tags. Basically, the browser corrects the error and displays the paragraph where it should be. In practice, we often use code validators, especially when working with large and complex documents. I will introduce you to such a validator to see what it says about our document. I go to Google and search for Validate HTML. I access validator.w3.org and choose Validate by Direct Input. In other words, I will validate the page by copying the code from the page and entering it into the Enter the Markup to Validate window. Copy all the content of the page with Ctrl+A, paste it into the validation window, and wait for the document to be validated. The validation is done almost instantly because the document is very thin and the result is a disaster. Let's now place the paragraph where it should be and validate the document again. Much better. Inside the head tags, there is content that is invisible on the page but very important, as you will see later. If any content within the head section is visible on the page, it is clear that a mistake has been made. I'll show you. I will remove the closing tag from meta name equals viewport. Exactly as I was saying. Generally, such things happen rarely and due to inattention. Those who work in the field and create web pages daily use what I mentioned in a previous lesson, a complex boilerplate that contains the entire structure within the head tags, followed by adding specific information for each individual website. CSS code is not visible on the page, but as you have seen, it has the ability to change the appearance of HTML elements. Let's open the page we worked on in the last lesson in Live Server, textstyling.html. The place for the CSS code is in the head section, but not necessarily in this way. The page is quite loaded, and at this moment, both the HTML code and the CSS code coexist on the same page. This can sometimes create confusion. The document can become enormous, and any subsequent code changes can be very difficult to make. CSS code can be inserted in 3 ways. Internally, which is exactly what we have at the moment, externally, and inline. The link to the reference after which we created this page in the previous lesson is styled inline, as you can see. For this, we add the style attribute to the element we want to style, and between the quotation marks, we can introduce any kind of CSS declaration. Inline CSS is used to apply unique styles directly to individual HTML elements. It can be handy in a few specific scenarios: quick fixes or overrides, when you need to apply a quick style change that overrides other styles, especially for testing or temporary adjustments. Unique styling, if only one element requires a specific style that won't be reused elsewhere. Inline CSS can be a simple solution. Email templates. Many email clients do not fully support internal or external CSS. Inline CSS ensures the styles are properly rendered across different email clients. Small projects. For very small projects or personal scripts where creating an external style sheet might be overkill. However, inline CSS should be used sparingly because it makes the HTML markup harder to read and maintain. For most projects, using internal or external style sheets is a better practice, as it keeps the styling separate from the content and allows for easier updates and reusability. Now let's see how to insert CSS code externally. We will create a new file called style.css. The .css extension is mandatory. We copy the CSS code from the page and place it in the newly created file. We eliminate the style tags as they are no longer needed. We notice that at this moment, the elements on the page have no styling. We solve this immediately by adding a line of code in the head section of the document, a line that is nothing but the address of the CSS file, the path to where the CSS file is located. Since it is in the same directory as the HTML document, the address will only contain the name of the CSS file. The element contains two attributes. The href attribute contains the path to the CSS file. An incorrect address will not load the CSS file, and the page will lack styling. The rel attribute in HTML is used within link and anchor tags to specify the relationship between the current document and the linked document or resource. It provides information about the type of connection or relationship. The link tag is a void type element, meaning an element without content, but which can have attributes. You can see that the page has become much lighter and now contains only HTML code. In Lesson 4, we talked a bit about text styling, and I have something else to show you. Websites have a set of default fonts that we can use. On this page, we are using the Arial font for all paragraphs, but we could load other fonts from the internet to use on the pages we create. Google provides a whole range of fonts for free that we can use. We go to Google and search for Google Fonts. Access the website, and in the search box, I will look for a specific font that I already know because it was and still is very popular, Roboto. I'll click on this font and choose the style or styles I want to use. Then open the font basket and copy the code provided by Google. I place the code in the head section of the page as advised, as you can see. I change the Arial font to Roboto. The difference might not be very noticeable because the two fonts are quite similar, but we will inspect the page, and here we can clearly see that the Roboto font is being used. I have chosen 3 styles for this font and use them all for demonstration purposes as follows. Font weight, 700. For .lesson info, font weight, 300. Finally, for .lesson description, font weight, 400. Soon we will start working on the online store, but first, we need to discuss a few more HTML tags. Let me show you how we can insert images and text boxes into an HTML document. We create a new file named images.html. We create a minimal HTML structure as I have shown you before. Type an exclamation mark and press the Tab key. To insert images into a web page, we will use a special HTML tag, simply called img. Type img and press the Tab key. img is another void element that does not require a closing tag. We immediately see that along with the img tag, there are two attributes. The src attribute is an abbreviation for the word source and specifies the location of an image, which is usually a URL or a path to an image file. The alt attribute specifies alternative text for an image if it cannot be displayed. The alt attribute provides alternative information for an image if a user, for some reason, cannot view it due to a slow connection, an error in the src attribute, or if the user is using a screen reader. In the Lesson-5 folder, there is another folder that contains two images. We will load one of the images. I will remove the alt attribute for the moment and make an intentional mistake to show you what happens. This is what we see when an image cannot be loaded. Add back the alt attribute and the alternative text for the image, boy and girl, and let's see how it works. Sometimes, it may seem complicated to add alternative text because it is not always easy to describe the content of an image, but that's exactly what we need to do when we add text for the alt attribute. If I were using a screen reader, I could hear the text. Let's see how we style the image. Add a class equals img1 to target the image. To start, let's make the image a little smaller. Width, 250 pixels. Notice that although we only changed the width, the height also changed. This is a specific behavior of images. The image is adjusted proportionally. For example, if we also add a value for the height, we will distort the image proportions or the aspect ratio, resulting in a distorted image. What do? We turn to CSS properties specific to images. Object fit. This property determines what happens when the dimensions we set in the CSS code do not match the dimensions of the image. For object fit, I will choose the value cover. This forces the image to occupy the space I set, while maintaining proportions, which is why not the entire image is visible. This can be useful or not, depending on the situation. We can choose which part of the image to be visible using the property. Object position, left or right. Object fit can also have other values, for example, contain. In this case, the image is scaled to maintain its aspect ratio while fitting within the element's content box, effectively constraining the content against the specified width and height of the element. Also, I can add a border using the border property to see even better. Border, 2 pixels, solid, blue. Now we can use two other values for object position. Object position, top. Object position, bottom. So, you've seen how we can manipulate images. I've used properties you're already familiar like width, height, border, but I've also used properties specific to images. Now I'm going to add another image and remove all properties except for width. For the second image, I will change the class name to class img2. And I will show you what we can do when we have multiple elements on the page that we want to style the same way. After .img1, we place a comma and add the class img2 for the second image. If we have 10 images that we want to style the same way, we can continue to add other classes, separated by commas. Let's move on to another void element, the input tag, which we will use to create text boxes. The input tag is versatile and can be used for various types of input fields, such as text boxes, checkboxes, radio buttons, and more. To introduce text boxes in an HTML document, we can use the input element with the type attribute set to text. Here's a basic example of how to create a text box. Type input and press the Tab key. The input element can be targeted by programming languages like JavaScript or PHP using attributes such as name, ID, or class to accept user data. The input element is one of the most powerful and complex in all of HTML due to the large number of combinations of input types and attributes. The type text attribute is the default. Let's see other examples of attributes. Input type, button. To truly see that we are dealing with a button, we need to add another attribute. To convert an input element into a button, we can set the type attribute to button and add a value attribute to define the button's label. Value, click me. Typed button specifies that the input element is a button. Value, click me, defines the text that will be displayed on the button. You can also use type, submit, or reset for different types of buttons in forms. We can add an attribute that can be targeted by a programming language such as JavaScript or PHP. Name equals button gives the button a name, which can be useful when working with forms or when targeting the element in JavaScript or other programming languages. Another useful attribute is checkbox, which creates a checkbox input element. Checkboxes allow users to select one or more options from a set. Everyone knows it. You've seen and used it many times when visiting various websites. When placing an online order, you have to check such a box. If you don't, you can't complete the order. For example, you have to agree to the terms and conditions of use. Checkboxes play a crucial role in user interactions on the web, ensuring that users acknowledge important information or consent to terms before proceeding. This way, they are a simple yet powerful way to collect user input and enforce necessary agreements. We need to add a label to know what the checkbox is for. Adding a label to a checkbox helps users understand its purpose. Type label and press the Tab key. I agree to the terms and conditions. The for attribute in the label is linked to the checkbox by matching its ID. The ID and name attributes help identify and target the checkbox. I will add another checkbox and then tell you more. Label, for equals, subscribe, subscribe to newsletter. Input type, checkbox. Name, subscribe. ID, subscribe. When I click on the text, subscribe to newsletter, the checkbox is checked. To explicitly associate a label element with an input element, first, add the ID attribute to the input element. Then, for the for attribute of the label element, add the same value as the ID attribute of the input element. We have all seen and filled out various forms on the web. Now we will also create a simple form for a start. We use the form tag. Type form and press the tab key. The form element is a container for various types of input elements. I will create a small form for first name and last name, which will send the values to the server, like when we create an account on a website. But first, I will add a border to the form to better see what we are doing here. Border, 2 pixels, solid, red. And now let's introduce the input elements for first name, last name, and the submit button. To let the user know what needs to be entered in each box, we should add 2 label elements, or we can use another attribute called placeholder. The placeholder attribute provides a short hint that describes the value to be entered in an input field. The placeholder disappears as soon as we start typing something in the text box. To place the 3 inputs one below the other, I will use the BR tag. This will create a simple line break. Normally, we do this using CSS, as you will see later. Using CSS is a more efficient and flexible way to control the layout and style of elements on a web page. Instead of relying on HTML tags like BR, we can use CSS to achieve a cleaner and more maintainable code structure. That's the end of Lesson 5. Try practicing with the elements you've learned so far. It's been a journey, but practice makes perfect. Playing around with these elements will solidify your understanding and prepare you for more advanced topics ahead. If you need any help along the way or have questions about specific elements, feel free to ask. Happy coding!